CEO Thomas Arledge is hosting a crucial meeting to sign an important contract. Suddenly, a young black janitor girl bursts in and warns him that the contract is actually part of a scheme, and the one who will suffer the most is him. No one believes her. In fact, they call security and have her thrown out. What they don't realize is that everything the black janitor girl said is true, and she's about to reveal the real mastermind behind it all, shattering Thomas's trust completely. The elevator chimed softly on the 30th floor of Belvoir Capital's glass and steel headquarters, but nobody turned to look. Inside the boardroom, the air was already heavy. Suits pressed sharp neckties, taut pens ready. Thomas Arledge, the company's CEO, hovered over a leather portfolio, his signature pen poised just inches above the dotted line. 12 executives sat along the obsidian table, their attention fixed on the glossy contract projected on the wall. The merger between Belvoir and Langston Royce would be the biggest in the firm's history. Billions at stake, legacies on the line, and it was all about to be sealed with one stroke of ink. That's when the door creaked. Not a dramatic slam, just the soft push of a janitor's access. Heads turned, some irritated, others dismissive. But the girl who stepped inside wasn't there to empty trash or wipe the windows. She was 16. Thin frame-long legs and faded maintenance coveralls. A mass of coiled black hair pulled high into a tight bun. The rubber soles of her old Converse squeaked slightly against the polished floor. The left heel was split. The right had a faded marker scrawl, Z. Zariah Miles stood just inside the doorway holding nothing but a cleaning clipboard and a courage she didn't know she had until now. Her heart thundered in her chest. Her mouth was dry. She didn't know if she'd get another breath after this one, but she said it anyway. If you sign that she said loud enough for the back of the room, you're not protecting your company, you're burying it. The silence was instant, cold, electric. Thomas's hand froze. The tip of his pen hovered just above the signature block. He didn't look up. Not yet, but the room had turned. Executives blinked. A few exchanged glances. One man seated closest to the door narrowed his eyes like he was staring at a stain that shouldn't be there. Zariah could feel every inch of judgment crawling over her skin. She wasn't supposed to be here, not in this room, not in this moment, and definitely not speaking. But it was too late. She stepped forward one pace. I read the clause, she said, her voice steadier now. Section 16, paragraph C. It doesn't limit liability, it flips it. Thomas's gaze lifted finally, meeting hers. His eyes, a cool gray, unreadable, locked onto hers across the length of the boardroom. The man beside him, Vincent Cleary, CFO, leaned in and whispered something under his breath. But Zariah didn't look away. She couldn't. Her palms were sweating inside her gloves, but she kept her chin up. It's buried in the language, she added. It looks like protection, but it makes Belvoir solely responsible if anything goes wrong after the merger. Defaults, legal actions, fraud. You'll be holding the entire bag while Langston Royce walks clean. A beat, then two. One of the younger executives reached forward and pulled his copy of the contract closer. Another tapped his tablet, scrolling fast. A woman near the far end of the table, Lorraine Hamlin Senior Legal, shifted uncomfortably in her seat. "Excuse me?" said a voice. Calm, sharp, dismissive. It belonged to William Stroud, head of acquisitions. His southern accent softened the edges, but the arrogance was unmistakable. "You're telling us you're the cleaner, and you just happened to find a $1 billion liability clause on your lunch break." "I wasn't on break," Zariah replied evenly. "I was replacing trash liners, but the file was left open at the copier. And yes, I read it." Stroud scoffed. "That's not reading, that's trespassing." But Thomas Arledge didn't react to him. His eyes were still on her, piercing, curious, maybe even disturbed. She shouldn't be in here. Someone muttered, "That's Cassandra's girl, the overnight crew." Zariah swallowed hard. Her throat ached. Just 8 hours ago, she'd been wiping fingerprints from elevator buttons, moving quietly between conference rooms with her mother. That was the rule. Don't be seen. Don't interrupt. Don't exist. But something about the file, its stamped cover, the phrasing, had screamed at her. Not just curiosity. It was instinct. A siren in her chest. A sense of danger she couldn't ignore. Now, standing in front of 12 people who saw her as nothing more than a background figure, she felt every ounce of that danger pressing back. Thomas finally broke the silence. "You said it flips liability," he asked. Quiet, controlled, too calm. Zariah nodded. "Yes, sir. The language is complex, but if your team missed it, and I think they did it, sets Belvoir up to take the fall for everything." Stroud let out a dry laugh. "This is nonsense." But Thomas didn't look at him. He turned his pen aside, reached for the document, and flipped to the reference page. His eyes scanned the lines. 1 line, 2, then 3. His brow furrowed. The room held its breath. Lorraine Hamlin shifted again, her fingers twitching at her own copy. Stroud's face was a portrait of disbelief. "Are we actually entertaining this a theory from someone who polishes door handles?" Zariah's cheeks burned, but her voice held. "You can laugh," she said, her jaw clenched. "But if you sign that your company's name is the only one on every lawsuit that follows." Silence. Back to that day. The vacuum hummed low in the hallway, its sound muffled behind the thick conference room doors. Zariah worked quietly, just like she always did. It was after midnight, and the top floor of Belvoir Capital was nearly empty. City lights poured in from the glass walls, throwing long silver streaks across the polished tile floors. She moved like routine tables, wiped chairs, reset fingerprints, lifted from the sliding glass doors with practiced ease. Her mother was 3 rooms down, polishing a chrome accent wall. They didn't talk while they worked. That was the rule. Quick, clean, invisible. But tonight something wasn't right. She noticed it as she reached the printer station next to the executive lounge. A thick stack of paper sat in the output tray, untouched, like someone had forgotten it. The top page was stamped "Final Draft, Langston-Royce Merger Agreement." Zariah's fingers stopped mid-swipe. Her eyes flicked toward the hallway. Empty. She looked down at the packet again. The pages were crisply aligned, no markings, no signature, just that bold black header in all caps. She told herself to ignore it. Clean around it. Don't touch what's not yours. But then she saw a line near the top of the page. Section 16, Risk Transfer Protocol. Her stomach tightened. She didn't know exactly why, but something about that phrase pulled at her. It wasn't curiosity. It was deeper, heavier. A reflex in her chest, like her body had recognized something before her mind did. She reached for the top page and flipped carefully to the next, then the next, until she hit page 12. Bolded subheadings, paragraphs in tight legal language. The air felt different around her now, too still, too quiet. She found it halfway down the page, 16C, Contingent Indemnity Allocation. Her heart skipped. She didn't understand every word, but the phrase jumped out at her like a warning flare. All post-merger liabilities to be assumed exclusively by the acquiring entity. Her mouth went dry. She blinked twice, reading the sentence again, slower this time. It didn't sound protective. It sounded like a trap. Zariah leaned back slightly, her eyes scanning further down. Her pulse started to thud in her ears. A line buried near the bottom read, "This clause supersedes prior indemnity agreements and shall be enforceable post-execution without conditional exception." She didn't know what that meant entirely, but one phrase stood out like a fire alarm in her memory: shift of liability. She had heard it once before. On CNBC, during a weekend segment she watched with her grandfather when she was 11. That show had explained how a Fortune 500 firm went bankrupt because of a single buried clause. They called it legal sleight of hand, a trick that looked like standard language but destroyed a company from the inside. She hadn't thought about that program in years, but now it was the only thing she could hear. Zariah took a step back from the printer. Her hands were sweating inside her gloves. Her heart was pounding like she'd just run a flight of stairs. She wiped her palms against her thighs, but it didn't help. She could feel her brain spinning, grabbing onto bits of memory, trying to piece together what she just read. A cleaner's daughter didn't belong in the language of billion-dollar deals, but she'd spent years watching business news instead of cartoons. She asked for financial books for her birthday. She once paused a movie just to Google hostile takeover. And now she was standing in front of a legal document that looked dangerously familiar, and she was the only one who had seen it. She heard footsteps behind her. Her body stiffened. It was her mother, Cassandra, dragging the vacuum cord behind her. "You good in here?" Her voice was low, distracted. Zariah flipped the pages back quickly, returning the file to how it was. "Yeah," she said, turning toward the counter with a spray bottle. "Just finishing." Cassandra glanced at the printer stack and frowned. "Don't mess with their stuff," she muttered. "We don't need trouble." Zariah didn't respond. She wanted to. But what could she say, Mom? I think I just found a clause that could sink this company. It sounded crazy, arrogant, impossible. She was 16. She didn't even have a parking pass. But the feeling wouldn't go away. That tight pressure in her chest, that certainty that something dangerous was hiding in plain sight. Cassandra unplugged the vacuum and moved down the hall. Zaria stood still for a moment longer, staring at the printer like it might burst into flames. She pulled out her phone, took a photo of the top page and the clause, just in case. Her hands trembled as she did it. Then she slid the stack back into place exactly as it had been. She wiped the counter one more time, even though it was already clean. As she walked out of the room, her mind was racing. She kept seeing the phrase, shift of liability, kept hearing the CNBC anchor's voice, it only takes one clause to kill a company. In her head, she tried to convince herself she was overreacting. Maybe she misunderstood it. Maybe the legal team knew what they were doing. Maybe the executives had already vetted the whole thing. But a voice deep inside her pushed back. Then why leave it at the printer? Why bury it in legalese? She passed the frosted glass office of the Belvoir legal team. Lights off. Doors locked. Downstairs in the maintenance locker room, she pulled off her gloves and sat on the bench, the same spot she always sat to wait for her mom. But tonight, her leg wouldn't stop bouncing. She pulled up the photo again, read the clause, again, and for the first time she let herself feel what she had been holding back. Fear. Because if she was right, if that clause really was what she thought it was, then someone had just tried to trick an entire boardroom into handing over the company's neck. And nobody noticed. Nobody but the girl with the janitor's badge, and no voice in the building. She closed her eyes and breathed in deep. Then her phone buzzed. A text from her mom, almost done. Meet me in lobby. Zaria stared at the screen. Her fingers hovered over the keys. Then, slowly, deliberately, she typed back, okay. But I have to tell you something first. She didn't know what would come next, but she knew one thing for sure. She wasn't just cleaning up someone else's mess anymore. She had just walked straight into one, and she was the only one who could see it. Now there was only silence in the conference room. The silence that followed Zariah's warning wasn't the kind of quiet that filled empty rooms. It was the sharp, cutting kind that filled judgment, cold, suspicious, angry. She stood there barely 5 feet from the polished conference table, her shoulders squared, her hands clenched at her sides. The boardroom, with its panoramic view of the Chicago skyline behind thick glass, suddenly felt like a cage. 12 executives stared at her, most with narrowed eyes, some with open scorn. No one spoke for several seconds, not even Thomas Arledge. Then, finally, someone did. She's just the cleaner's kid, snapped Harold Deming, Belvoir's senior acquisitions officer. His voice was sharp, offended. He pointed an accusing finger in Zariah's direction, as if she'd tracked mud across a velvet carpet. She shouldn't even be in this room. A wave of agreement moved down the table shifts in posture, eyes rolling, mouths tightening. A few executives muttered under their breath. Someone tapped impatiently on a tablet. Zariah's heart slammed against her ribs, but her feet stayed planted. Her breath came shallow and fast, but she didn't break eye contact with the CEO. Her throat burned from holding it all in. I read the clause, she repeated softer this time, but with no less force. It flips liability. If you sign it, everything that goes wrong, Belvoir owns it. Langston Royce walks away. Jesus, someone hissed, clearly fed up. Get security. And just like that, the 2 glass doors opened again. 2 uniformed security officers stepped into the room, tall and broad-shouldered. Their presence alone made Zariah feel smaller, like the room had shrunk around her. Ma'am, one of them said, you need to come with us. Zariah didn't argue, she didn't scream, she didn't run. But her body betrayed her. Her hands trembled and her legs felt like concrete. As they moved toward her, Thomas Arledge raised one hand not to stop them, but as if telling the room to hold. His eyes had not left her. He looked not angry, not surprised, but thoughtful. Like something about this girl in her worn-out sneakers and faded work uniform had unsettled a part of him he didn't even know existed. Zariah caught his gaze just for a second, and in that second, everything else, the security, the glares, the humiliation, faded. Her lungs ached from holding her breath. She didn't know if this man would believe her, if he would even bother to read the clause. But she saw something in his face. It wasn't respect. Not yet. It was attention, real attention, and that was more than she had ever expected. The guards gently took her by the arms. She didn't resist, but as they turned her toward the door, Harold muttered again, louder this time. This is what happens when people forget their place. The words hit Zariah like a slap, but she didn't let it show. She lifted her chin, forced her spine straight. Let them see her walk not dragged. The doors closed behind her. The hallway was colder than she remembered. The fluorescent lights hummed above her, flickering slightly. One of the guards walked ahead. The other stayed beside her. Neither of them spoke. She could hear her footsteps echo against the marble floors. Each step sounded louder than the last. Her stomach twisted with humiliation. Her mind raced. Was she wrong? Had she misunderstood the clause? Had she just humiliated herself in front of the most powerful people in the building? She thought about her mother, how her mother would react when she heard, how the other cleaners would talk about her, the girl who spoke out of turn, the girl who didn't know her place. But somewhere underneath the fear, a tiny ember still burned. That clause, that line, shift of liability. She hadn't imagined it. She hadn't made it up. She'd seen it, and she knew what it meant. The only question now was, would anyone else bother to look upstairs in the conference room? The air hadn't moved. Thomas Arledge remained standing, his hand still resting on the folder. Slowly, deliberately, he opened the document and turned to page 16. The other executives watched him, some puzzled, others visibly annoyed. He didn't speak as he scanned the page. His eyes moved quickly at first, then slower, then stopped. He read the line once, then again. His jaw tightened. A small muscle pulsed at the edge of his temple. Lorraine Hamlin, the firm's legal director, leaned forward slightly. "Thomas," she said, almost too quietly to be heard. "It's standard indemnity language. We've reviewed it twice." But Thomas didn't answer. He ran his finger along the printed paragraph, right where Zaria had pointed. He didn't like being surprised. He didn't like being told what to do. But he also wasn't stupid. And he had a rule. If something doesn't feel right, it probably isn't. And something about the way that girl had stood shaking, but steady, had made the hairs on his neck stand up. He tapped the page lightly. "Have legal pull the full indemnity trail for Langston Royce's past 3 mergers," he said without looking up. "What?" Deming barked. "You can't seriously do it." Thomas cut in sharper now. "Now." The room quieted again. A few people shifted uncomfortably. Lorraine nodded and began typing on her laptop. Nobody mentioned Zaria again. Downstairs, Zaria sat alone on the bottom step outside the building, her hands wrapped around her elbows. Her cleaning badge hung limp around her neck. The night air had turned colder, but she didn't feel it. She stared out at the empty streetcars passing in the distance. For a moment, she felt everything all at once. Shame, fear, rage, confusion. She felt like crying, but didn't. She felt like running, but didn't move. All she could hear were Harold's words. "She's just the cleaner's kid." That was how they saw her. Not Zaria. Not the girl who studied policy reports with her grandfather. Not the girl who knew what indemnity clauses were before she could drive. Just the cleaner's kid. But the truth didn't care about your last name. The truth didn't wear suits. It didn't carry business cards. Sometimes it came from someone no one ever expected. And that was what she held on to. That no matter how loud they laughed, how quick they were to dismiss her, she had seen something they hadn't. And deep down, part of her believed that someone up there, maybe just one person, had noticed that too. Inside on the 30th floor, Thomas Arledge flipped back to the front of the contract and closed it. He didn't say anything to the room, but he also didn't pick up his pen. The room was windowless, small, and too bright. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like angry insects. 2 gray metal chairs sat side by side in front of a long folding table. A security guard stood at the door. He didn't speak. He didn't look at them either. Zaria sat with her back straight, arms crossed tightly, trying not to fidget. Her cleaning badge still hung around her neck. It felt heavier now, like it was dragging her whole chest downward. Her mother, Latanya Miles, sat next to her, still in her work uniform blue shirt, untucked sleeves, rolled-up shoes, scuffed from 12-hour shifts. Her hands were clasped in her lap knuckles white. Neither of them had said a word since being led into the security office 20 minutes earlier. Zaria stared at the floor tiles, counting the cracks between each one. She could feel her mother's silence beside her, thick, pressing, loud in its own way. The kind of silence that said more than shouting ever could. She didn't expect to be thanked. She didn't expect applause. But she didn't expect this. Finally, her mother spoke. Her voice was low, rough, and tired. "You had to open your mouth." Zaria swallowed hard. She didn't answer. Latanya kept her eyes forward. "I swept floors in that building for 8 years, Z," she said. 8. I never missed a night. Never asked for overtime. I did my job, kept quiet. That's how we stayed safe. "I know," Zaria whispered. Her mother's jaw tightened. "No, you don't." Zariah turned to her. Mom, I wasn't trying to. Latanya raised a hand. You think you did something brave. Maybe you did. I don't know. But what I do know is this brave don't pay rent. Brave don't put food on our table. Her voice cracked on the last word. Zariah's throat tightened. I saw something wrong. I couldn't ignore it. You could have, Latanya snapped. You just chose not to. The room went still again. The guard shifted slightly but still didn't speak. Zariah looked away. Her face burned with shame. Not because she thought she was wrong, but because she had brought this on both of them. Her mom had been nothing but loyal, showed up early, stayed late, took every shift, never complained. And now, because Zariah had said one sentence in one meeting she never should have been near her mother, was being treated like a liability. We're suspended, Latanya said after a long silence. No pay. Pending review. Whatever that means. Zariah didn't move. I asked if we were fired, her mom continued. HR lady just said, we'll call you. Zariah nodded slowly. She wanted to apologize, but the words felt empty. I didn't mean for this to happen, she said finally. Her mother let out a humorless laugh. Nobody ever does. That don't stop it from happening. Zariah gripped the edge of the chair. All she had done was point out the truth. One clause, one sentence. And now they were both paying for it. And no one upstairs had come down to say a word. No thank you. No explanation. Just silence. Just shame. Just a young girl and her mother sitting in a room where nobody would look them in the eye. The guard opened the door, finally, his voice flat. You're free to go. Neither of them responded at first. Then Latanya stood up, slow, shoulders stiff. She didn't say another word as she walked out. Zariah followed. The lobby looked different now. Colder, larger, empty. They walked side by side toward the exit. The night air hit them hard as they stepped out onto the sidewalk. Traffic passed like nothing had happened. Halfway down the block, Latanya stopped. I lost everything tonight, she said softly. Zariah stared at her. No, she said. You didn't. Her mom turned sharply. Then tell me what I still have. Zariah searched for the right words. All she could say was the truth. You still have your name. You still have your integrity. Latanya's eyes filled, but she blinked quickly, swallowing it down. That's not what landlords take, baby. Zariah looked down. She understood, because sometimes the price of truth wasn't a headline. It was a missed paycheck, an eviction notice, a fridge with nothing in it. No one told you that part when they talked about doing the right thing. The truth was, some people couldn't afford to speak up, not because they didn't see the wrong, but because they were too close to the edge already, and Zariah had pushed them closer. They walked the rest of the way to the train station in silence. When they got home, the apartment felt smaller, colder. Latanya dropped her keys on the counter and went straight to the bathroom. The sound of the faucet running filled the silence. Zariah sat at the kitchen table, still in her uniform. Her phone buzzed, but she didn't look at it. She stared at the crack in the laminate. She thought of the executives upstairs still sitting in the boardroom, still wearing suits, still drinking bottled water, still talking. Nothing had changed for them, but everything had changed for her, because she had told the truth, and the truth had a cost. She just hadn't realized who would pay it. The email came just after 3 in the morning. Zariah had been sitting on the floor of her bedroom hoodie, zipped up knees pulled to her chest. The apartment was silent except for the ticking of the kitchen clock and the hum of the refrigerator. Her mother had gone to bed hours ago. No one had said goodnight. Zariah didn't sleep. She kept replaying everything: the boardroom, the look on Mr. Arledge's face, the sting of her mother's voice, the cold metal chair in the security office. Her laptop was open on the coffee table, untouched. Her phone lay face down on the floor next to her until it buzzed, once faint and sharp. She turned it over. From raymond.ellis.public@protonmail.com. Subject: you saw it too. She stared at it. Her fingers hovered over the screen for several seconds before she tapped it open. I saw what you saw. Or something like it. 3 years ago. You're not crazy. They've done it before. I tried to stop it. It cost me everything. If you want to talk, I'll listen. Raymond Ellis. Her pulse quickened. The name sounded familiar. She opened her laptop and typed quickly. Raymond Ellis, Belvoir Capital. The first hit was an old press release from 5 years ago. Ellis had been the senior internal auditor for Belvoir. Highly respected. He'd resigned suddenly. No reason given. The next result was a blog post from a whistleblower site, Anonymous Speculative. It mentioned Ellis's departure, hinted at a discrepancy in merger reports, but nothing concrete. Then, silence. Gone. Zariah sat up straighter. Her hands were cold. She typed back short and direct. This is Zariah. Yes, I saw it. They suspended my mom and me. No one will listen. Less than a minute passed before his reply came in. That's how it starts. They isolate you, make you doubt. It's how they bury truth. But this time, maybe they didn't bury it fast enough. Can you talk tomorrow? Safe place, public, neutral? She hesitated, then typed back. Yes. Tell me where. The cafe was near the train station, a plain place open 24 hours, mostly filled with night shift workers and early risers. Zariah took a booth near the window, wearing her old hoodie, her hair pulled into a bun. She kept her phone in her lap, her thumb hovering over the emergency call button. She didn't know what to expect. Then the door opened. Raymond Ellis didn't look like someone who once sat on a corporate board. His coat was worn a little frayed at the edges. He had a short salt and pepper beard and wire-rimmed glasses. He carried a small canvas messenger bag and looked around before walking over. You, Zariah, she nodded. He sat down across from her, folding his hands on the table. His voice was calm, but tired. I watched the live feed. You stopped the signature. You probably don't know what that means yet. She shook her head. Raymond opened the bag and pulled out a slim folder. He didn't hand it to her. He let it sit between them. 3 years ago, they tried the same thing. Not the exact same language, but the structure. Shift liability, inflate value, use shell companies to hide assets. After the merger, the new company collapses and the losses stay with the buyer. Zariah blinked. They've done this before. He nodded slowly. 2 other mergers, both in Texas. Companies folded within 6 months. Hundreds laid off. No criminal charges, no headlines, just silence. She swallowed hard. What does this have to do with me? Raymond looked at her closely. In both deals, someone signed off on the clauses last minute. Not the legal department, not the board. He paused. It was Miriam Arledge, Thomas's wife. On record, hidden in back-end systems. The clause is always tied to her digital approval credentials. Zariah's breath caught. But why? Raymond leaned forward, voice lower. She's connected to Julian Cross. You won't find that name in Belvoir's files, but he owns shell corporations that profit off these collapses. The pattern is too clean. Zariah stared at the folder. Why are you telling me this? Raymond's jaw tightened. Because I tried to tell someone once, a senior partner. I showed him the data. Next thing I knew, I was asked to resign. No threats, no confrontation. Just career gone. Doors closed. Credit ruined. His eyes darkened. You know what it's like to watch your name disappear, to know the truth and see no one care. Zariah nodded slowly. That's how it feels now. He pushed the folder toward her. You saw it first this time. You acted. That means something. She didn't touch it. Why me? She asked. I'm just a cleaner's daughter. Raymond exhaled. Because no one looked at you. That's why you saw it. She looked down at the folder. Her fingers hovered just above it. Will they come after me? His voice turned quiet. They'll try to discredit you, scare you, maybe worse. Because people like you, people who aren't supposed to speak, they terrify power. Zariah picked up the folder. It was light, just a few sheets inside, but it felt heavier than anything she'd ever held. She looked at him. You said it cost you everything. He nodded once. It did. Then why help me? Raymond smiled faintly. Because you didn't run. And maybe this time the story ends differently. They sat in silence for a moment. Zariah slipped the folder into her backpack. Her heart was pounding again, not from fear this time, but from something else. Hope. For the first time since that boardroom, she didn't feel alone. The next day, Thomas Arledge didn't expect to see her again. He was in his office, lights low blinds drawn halfway against the afternoon sun. The contract still sat on his desk, untouched since the night of the boardroom interruption. He had read it twice, then once more. The clause still bothered him, but he couldn't explain why. So when his assistant buzzed through and said, Mr. Arledge, someone's here to see you, Zariah Miles, he almost said no. But then he hesitated and said, send her in. Zariah stepped in slowly, eyes alert but not afraid. She wore a gray hoodie, sleeves tugged over her hands, and her backpack slung over one shoulder. Her posture was respectful but firm. Thomas leaned back in his chair, unsure what to expect. You've got nerve coming back here, he said. Given everything. She nodded once. I know, but I didn't come to argue. I came to warn you. Thomas raised an eyebrow. Warn me about what? Zariah stepped closer and set a folded piece of paper on the edge of his desk. Your wife's signature appears in every questionable clause tied to Langston Royce's past mergers. Raymond Ellis tracked them before he was forced out. Thomas's eyes darkened. He didn't reach for the paper. "This is crossing a line," he said, voice tight. "You don't get to make accusations like that. I didn't come here to disrespect you." She replied calmly, "I came because I think you're still the only one up here who might care about what's real. That clause in the merger, it's designed to sink you, not save you, and someone on the inside approved it." He shook his head. "You think my wife is conspiring against my company? That's insane." Zariah stayed still. "Maybe," she said, "but ask yourself this. How did that clause get past your legal team, past your eyes, past everyone? Unless someone very close wanted it to." Thomas looked away. "She's your blind spot," Zariah continued, "and I get it, because when you trust someone, really trust them, you stop double-checking. But people like me, we don't have that luxury." Thomas stood now, clearly uncomfortable. "I think this conversation is over." Zariah stepped back. "That's up to you. But if I were wrong, I wouldn't be risking my future just to say it to your face." He didn't respond. She nodded slightly. "I'm sorry about how this had to happen. I really am. But you need to look closer." Then she turned and left. Thomas stood in the silence for a long moment after the door clicked shut. The accusation gnawed at him. Absurd. Offensive. Thomas Arledge wasn't the kind of man who let suspicion grow easily. For most of his life, he believed in logic, in data, in numbers that lined up, in contracts that could be trusted. He believed in Miriam. They had built Belvoir Capital together. At least, that was the story they told. She had been by his side since the company's second year. Charming, composed, brilliant in public. Sharp enough to navigate any room. Loyal enough, he thought, to protect what they had built. But now, he was watching her across a bar room full of strangers. The private lounge sat above Michigan Avenue, framed in amber lights and muted jazz. Thomas had arrived unannounced, slipping past the valet in a dark coat and low baseball cap. He didn't belong in a place like this without an appointment, but tonight wasn't about business. He sat in the far corner, half obscured behind a wall of decorative plants, his phone camera angled downward on the table. And there she was. Miriam Arledge, in navy silk and high heels, walked in like she owned the place. Her hair swept back, her lipstick precise. She gave no sign of looking for Thomas. Why would she? She wasn't meeting him. She moved with the ease of someone familiar with the room. Not scanning, not searching, confident. 2 minutes later, Nathan Price entered through the side entrance. Thomas's stomach tightened. Nathan was the executive liaison for Langston Royce, the same firm that had nearly tied Belvoir into a billion-dollar liability clause just 2 nights earlier. On paper, he and Thomas were still negotiating, but Miriam rose when she saw him, smiled, walked toward him. No handshake, no hesitation. They sat together in a booth near the back. Low light, privacy. Thomas leaned slightly, careful not to draw attention. His phone remained steady on the table camera recording. He didn't need audio. He just needed to see. Nathan said something, leaning in. Miriam laughed. Not forced, not businesslike, familiar. Then he slid something across the table. Thomas's breath caught. A flash drive, small, silver. She picked it up with 2 fingers, barely glancing before sliding it into her purse. Then her hand rested lightly on Nathan's wrist. Just for a moment. But it lingered. Thomas looked away. His throat felt dry. His jaw clenched. His pulse thundered in his ears. It wasn't just betrayal. It was humiliation. This wasn't some corporate error. This wasn't an overstep in paperwork or a legal misunderstanding. This was personal. The woman he shared a home with, the woman he defended in front of the board, was sitting across from the man trying to destroy him, and she was smiling. He stayed long enough to watch Nathan rise and kiss her cheek before leaving. Miriam didn't follow. She took out her phone and typed something, then sipped her drink like nothing had just happened. Thomas stood. He didn't go over, didn't make a scene. He walked out into the night air and didn't stop moving until he reached the sidewalk, his fists stuffed into his coat pockets. He felt hollow. The betrayal wasn't loud. It didn't scream. It whispered. It gnawed. It told him that the thing he thought was safest, his own home, was the one place he should have never let his guard down. He had built a company from scratch. He had survived market crashes, political storms, shareholder uprisings. But he had missed this, and it hadn't come from a competitor. It had come from the person who slept beside him. When he got home, the penthouse was dark. Miriam wasn't there. He didn't expect her to be. He walked straight to his study, closed the door, sat down at his desk, and stared at the contract. The unsigned document was still there, the page Zaria Miles had pointed to. He had read it again and again, At first out of doubt, then out of disbelief. Now he read it out of rage. The clause was clever, clean, bearing liability into indemnity language so polished it would pass even internal review. But now he saw it clearly. It was never meant to protect Belvoir. It was meant to shift the crash onto him and to let someone else walk away untouched. He opened his laptop, typed in access credentials to old merger archives. His hands moved fast, fueled by adrenaline and betrayal. He pulled up transaction histories, review logs, everything Raymond Ellis had once flagged. He hadn't believed Ellis back then, thought he was paranoid, bitter, maybe even unstable. But now, Thomas knew better. He followed the approval trails in the last 2 years. There it was, Miriam's user ID, a digital footprint in every questionable document, not always obvious, sometimes embedded deep in the metadata, but always there. She had signed off on them all. His throat tightened. The same hands that held his face in the morning had held the pen that approved those deals. The same voice that told him, "You're doing the right thing," was the voice that helped bury companies. His phone buzzed. It was a message from her. "On my way home. Everything okay?" Thomas stared at it. He didn't reply. Not because he didn't know what to say, but because he didn't want to lie anymore. He looked back at the screen, at the name in the audit trail. Miriam Arledge, his wife, his co-founder, his enemy. Back to Zaria, she is being held accountable for her words and integrity. It started with a headline. Teen janitor halts billion-dollar merger, Belvoir Capital scrambles to investigate. At first, it was just a whisper on social media. Then it made the business blogs. Within 48 hours, it was on every major network. Talk shows debated it. Panelists speculated. One photo began circulating everywhere. Zaria Miles in her oversized hoodie walking past the revolving doors of Belvoir Tower with her chin high and her eyes down. People called her brave. People called her reckless. People called her a liar. And through it all, she stayed quiet. But silence didn't mean safety. It was a Wednesday morning when Zaria opened her locker at school and found the note. Folded in half. No name. Just 5 words scrawled in red pen. "We know where you live." She stared at it for a long time. Her fingers froze. Her breath shortened. Around her, the hallway buzzed with chatter footsteps and the distant clang of a locker slammed shut. But inside, she was still. Her hands shook as she tucked the paper into her backpack. She didn't cry. Not there. Not in front of them. By third period, she had 3 new voicemails from blocked numbers. By lunch, kids started whispering when she walked past. Some moved their backpacks away. Others just stared. In gym class, she overheard one girl say, "I heard her mom got fired. That's what you get for thinking you're better than everybody." Zaria said nothing. She laced her shoes, ran her laps, pretended it didn't hurt. But it did. It hurt in her chest, in the pit of her stomach, in the tightness in her jaw every time someone looked at her like she was contagious. At home, things weren't better. Her mother had withdrawn. Silent, tense. Job prospects were drying up fast. No one wanted to hire a liability. No one wanted trouble. They ate dinner in silence. And every night, Zaria sat by the window, staring out at the streetlights, wondering if speaking up had been worth it. Then came the knock. It was late, almost midnight. Her mother opened the door in her robe, cautious. A woman stood there. Black blazer, natural curls, leather briefcase, eyes sharp. "Mrs. Miles, I'm Naomi Grant. I'm here to speak with your daughter." Zaria stepped into the hallway before her mother could respond. "I'm Zaria," she said. Naomi studied her, not like the media did, not like the school kids, but like someone who knew what a survivor looked like. She nodded. "I read your statement. I read the clause. And I've read the reports that followed." Zaria's eyes narrowed. "And I believe you," Naomi said. "And I think you need a lawyer." Latanya stepped between them. "Are you with Belvoir?" Naomi shook her head. "I'm with no one. I represent whistleblower survivors and people the world tries to silence. You can check my record." Zaria spoke first. "Why now?" Naomi's voice softened. "Because it's starting. You made noise. And when that happens, people in power move fast. They'll try to bury you under reputation, under legal threats, under fear. But you don't have to fight them alone." Latanya didn't look convinced. "We don't have money for lawyers." Naomi smiled. "Good. Because I don't take money from clients like you. I take it from the people who try to crush you." For the first time in days, Zaria felt the pressure in her chest shift. Not gone, but shared. "Okay," she said. "What do we do first?" The next morning, Belvoir Capital issued a statement. All allegations are being taken seriously. Internal review pending. Naomi held a press conference on the courthouse steps. Zariah stood behind her, hands clenched. She's 16, Naomi told reporters. She saw what teams of corporate attorneys ignored, and for that, she's being harassed, discredited, and threatened. That ends now. Within hours, her inbox flooded again, this time with support. Emails from whistleblowers, from former employees, from people saying, "They did it to me too." Still, the threats kept coming. Another note in her locker, a message spray-painted on the alley wall near their building. "Stay silent, stay safe." Naomi stayed close. "This is how they work," she told Zariah. "They create fear. They hope it's enough to shut you down before you ever see the inside of a courtroom. But it won't be," Zariah said. Naomi smiled. "No, it won't." That Friday, Zariah walked into school and found a crowd gathered around the bulletin board. Someone had printed her photo grainy from the news and pinned it beside a flyer that read, "Snitches get stitches." No one touched it. No one took it down. Until one teacher, Mr. Garrison, walked over and ripped it off the board. Then he looked at Zariah. "I've got your back," he said, and walked away. That was the first time Zariah cried. Not out of fear, but out of relief. Because finally, someone stood beside her without asking why. That night, Naomi handed Zariah a manila folder. Inside, she said, is everything we need to start pushing for legal protection, witness status, federal attention. Zariah took it. Her fingers were steadier now. "What happens if this goes to trial?" Naomi looked her in the eye. "Then you stand, and you tell them the truth, and I'll be standing right next to you." Zariah nodded. "Okay," she said. "Then let's begin." The courtroom was colder than she imagined. Zariah sat outside the double doors, knees pressed together, fingers interlaced so tight, her knuckles paled. She was wearing her only formal outfit, a thrifted navy blue skirt, a white blouse borrowed from her mother, and scuffed flats one size too tight. Her hair was pulled back into a puff, high and firm, just the way her grandfather liked it when she watched financial shows with him. Naomi Grant stood beside her, arms crossed, face unreadable. The lawyer had been through this 100 times, but Zariah hadn't. Not like this. "You ready?" Naomi asked quietly. Zariah didn't answer right away. She swallowed, feeling the dry knot in her throat. "No," she admitted, "but I'll go anyway." Naomi smiled. That's exactly what courage sounds like. The bailiff opened the doors. "All rise. The court is now in session." Zariah rose. So did the weight on her chest. The courtroom buzzed. Journalists, investors, Belvoir board members, the Arledges. Her school principal was there too. And someone whispered that the governor's office had sent a representative. Everyone knew her name now. Everyone wanted to see the janitor girl speak. She was sworn in. The judge, an older woman with silver hair and sharp eyes, gave her a nod. "Miss Zariah Miles, you may proceed." She sat in the witness chair. It felt too big. Her feet barely touched the floor. The opposing attorney stood, shuffling papers, voice smooth. "Miss Miles, you are 16, correct? Yes, ma'am. And not trained in law. No, ma'am, you are not a financial analyst. No, not an auditor, no. You were at the time employed by Belvoir Capital as a janitorial assistant." Zariah hesitated, then nodded. "Yes." The attorney raised an eyebrow. "Then how could you possibly claim to understand the legality or financial risk of Clause 16C in a confidential merger contract?" There was a murmur in the room. Zariah's heart pounded in her chest. She glanced toward Naomi, who simply mouthed, "Tell the truth." Zariah turned back to the attorney, her voice small at first. "I don't know all the laws." "That's true." She took a breath deeper this time. "But I know what a lie looks like, and I know what it feels like when people hope you won't notice." The attorney tried to interrupt, but the judge raised a hand. "Let her speak." Zariah continued, her voice steadying. "That day, I was cleaning the boardroom. I saw papers printed and left in the tray. I shouldn't have read them. I know that. But one sentence stopped me." She looked directly at the judge now. "Shift of liability onto acquiring party in event of post-merger bankruptcy." That's what it said. And I remembered hearing something just like that on CNBC months before when my grandpa and I watched the coverage of that Darnell Langston fallout, the one where employees lost everything. She looked down for a moment, then back up. "I didn't know everything. I still don't. But it felt wrong. So I spoke up." The room was silent. Then came the question no one dared ask, but someone had to. The defense attorney leaned in, eyes narrowed. "You're just the cleaner's daughter. Why should anyone believe you?" Zariah inhaled slowly. She turned her head. Her eyes landed on Miriam Arledge, sitting perfectly still in a pristine white suit, not a hair out of place. Her hands were folded on her lap, diamond ring glinting under courtroom lights. Zariah looked her dead in the eye, because picking up garbage teaches you to recognize it even when it wears lipstick and signs checks. A gasp broke out. One juror's pen slipped. Someone coughed to cover a laugh. But Miriam didn't blink. Zariah turned back to the judge. Because being a janitor's kid doesn't mean I'm blind. It means I see things most people ignore. Her voice didn't shake now. I saw the clause. I saw who tried to bury it. And I saw what would have happened if no one said anything. The judge leaned forward. Miss Miles, do you believe this merger was intentionally designed to fail? Zariah hesitated. Then she nodded. Yes. And I think someone very close to Mr. Arledge had something to gain from it. There was a stir at the defense table. Miriam shifted slightly but said nothing. The judge glanced toward Naomi. No further questions, Naomi said softly, her gaze never leaving Zariah. The gavel tapped once. You may step down. Zariah stood. As she walked back to her seat, dozens of eyes followed her. Some skeptical, some stunned, some, just a few, looked proud. But none of that mattered to her anymore, because she had said it. Out loud, in front of them all. Outside the courthouse, cameras flashed. Reporters shouted questions. Zariah held Naomi's hand tightly. One voice cut through the rest. Do you think the company will retaliate? Zariah looked at the reporter. Maybe, she said. But now they'll have to do it out loud. That night, as the footage aired on national news, one headline captured the moment. Best 16-year-old janitor's daughter confronts CEO's wife in court. And the country listens. In a quiet apartment in East Ridge, Latanya, Miles paused the TV and stared at the screen. Her daughter stood taller than she ever remembered. She whispered, "That's my baby." Zariah didn't hear her. She was already in her room, curled up in bed, still in her blouse and skirt, eyes closed, but mind wide awake. Because now, she knew something she hadn't known before. She could speak. And when she did, the world didn't crumble. It listened. The courtroom was packed. Not just with lawyers, journalists, and shareholders, but with regular people too. Mothers holding babies, high school teachers, young black students from neighborhoods like East Ridge. They came because they'd followed every step, every headline, every gasp from the witness stand. They came to see if truth still meant something in America. Zariah sat in the back row, her hands folded in her lap, her mother beside her. Latanya wore her Sunday church dress and tried to hold her chin high, but her fingers were trembling. In front of them, Naomi Grant stood in a dark navy suit, arms crossed. Next to her, Thomas Arledge sat alone. His eyes hadn't moved from the floor for 20 minutes. And on the other side of the room, Miriam Arledge and Nathan Price sat in silence. The two former power players of Belvoir, now stripped of their corporate armor. No assistants, no designer bags, just orange jumpsuits and shackles. The judge entered. All rise. Everyone stood. A moment of silence, heavy, like a held breath. Then the voice of judgment came. This court has reviewed the evidence presented, the backdoor clauses, the illegal offshore accounts, the bribery, the breach of fiduciary duty. The judge's eyes fell on Miriam. Mrs. Arledge, Mr. Price, you knowingly designed a merger with concealed liability traps to offload risk onto smaller investors while preserving personal gain. Your scheme caused financial ruin, endangered thousands of jobs, and manipulated federal regulators. Zariah's heartbeat climbed. Every word felt like justice finally remembering her name. Therefore, the judge said, her voice firm, this court sentences both defendants to 10 years in federal prison. There was a gasp in the room, and orders a full seizure of assets linked to the fraudulent mergers, including trusts, offshore holdings, and shell companies. Zariah could barely breathe. Thomas didn't move. Not a flinch. He just exhaled, slow and quiet, like a weight had lifted he didn't realize he was still carrying. Later that day outside the courthouse, Thomas stood behind a podium. His tie was gone. His sleeves were rolled up. And for the first time in months, he looked human. I founded Belvoir Capital with a vision to empower, not deceive, he began. His voice cracked just slightly. That vision was corrupted not only by those closest to me, but because I allowed comfort to replace vigilance. I should have seen it sooner. I didn't, but someone else did. He paused. She wasn't on the board. She wasn't a lawyer. She was a 16-year-old girl mopping floors whose sense of truth was sharper than my own. He turned to the crowd. Today, I'm announcing the Zariah Miles Scholarship, a full ride for first-generation college students pursuing law, finance, or ethics in business. There were cameras clicking, reporters scribbling, but Zariah wasn't paying attention to any of that. She was staring at her name on the banner behind him, in bold blue letters. No typos, no jokes, no shame, just her name, and the word scholarship right next to it. Later that week, an envelope arrived in the mail. The logo on the corner read Columbia University. She opened it slowly, her mother peeking over her shoulder. "Dear Miss Zariah Miles," the letter began, "we are pleased to offer you admission to our undergraduate law and society program with full scholarship assistance." The rest of the words blurred. Her eyes were too full of tears. Her mother clutched her from behind. "You did it, baby." Zariah turned, voice cracking. "No, we did." The following Sunday at New Light Baptist Church, Reverend Calloway paused the sermon to say something he hadn't planned. There's a young woman in this room who proved that truth still matters, that age, race, or income don't define your integrity. He looked right at her. She didn't ask for the spotlight. She earned it. In the congregation stood. Applause filled the room. For a moment, Zariah felt like her feet weren't touching the floor. But what grounded her wasn't pride, it was peace. Not a loud kind of peace. A quiet one. The kind that settles in your bones when you've carried something heavy and finally put it down. She still swept the kitchen floor at home. Still walked to the corner store with her mom on Saturdays. Still braided her cousin's hair before school. But now she also replied to interview requests. She signed the front page of the local paper. She answered letters from other girls who wanted to speak up too. Some asked how she stayed brave. She always gave the same answer. I wasn't brave alone, but someone had to go first. And the world, it kept spinning. People moved on. News cycles turned. Companies rebranded. But in one high-rise office in Manhattan, a plaque now sat on a freshly painted wall. Integrity is built from the ground up. Zariah Miles. It was a morning stitched together by nerves and pride. Zariah Miles stood on the steps of the very building where she had once scrubbed chewing gum off marble tiles. Belvoir Capital's New York headquarters loomed tall behind her steel glass legacy. But today, that legacy was being rewritten. The plaza was full. Journalists, lawyers, employees in gray suits, community leaders, students, protesters who had once stood outside the building, now stood inside the velvet rope invited. Zariah adjusted the collar of her navy blue blazer. She wasn't wearing a gown or anything flashy, just clean lines, sharp shoulders, and the pin Naomi Grant had given her a tiny silver sword for the invisible ones. Her mother, LaTanya, stood quietly off stage, hands clasped, heart pounding faster than her daughter's. "Are you ready, baby?" she whispered. Zariah nodded once. She was. Inside the building, the room had changed. Gone were the intimidating rows of portraits of old, pale executives staring down like marble judges. Gone was the thick Persian rug that once absorbed boardroom secrets. Now the room had windows open wide. Sunlight poured in like truth unfiltered. At the center, a long oak table. And at the head of that table, Thomas Arledge. He stood up as Zariah entered, and every other person in the room followed. A standing ovation. Not for a deal, not for a profit margin, for a girl who told the truth before anyone believed her. Thomas extended his hand. In it, a fountain pen silver-plated with Belvoir's old crest engraved on the clip. "I almost used this pen to sign a lie," he said. Zariah looked at him calm and steady. He handed it to her. "But I'd rather you be the one to help us sign something honest." She took it slowly. Her hands didn't tremble. Not anymore. He turned toward the documents laid out on the table. "This," he said to the room, "is Belvoir's official governance reform package, overhauled board structure, new transparency measures, whistleblower protection fund. And every page exists because one young woman refused to stay quiet." Murmurs of agreement passed through the room. Thomas nodded to Zariah. "You have the honor." She stepped forward, clicked the pen, and signed her name. The room didn't explode into applause. It didn't need to. What happened next was quieter but heavier with meaning. Zariah turned around to face the press. Dozens of cameras aimed at her face, lights hot on her cheeks, microphones lined up waiting for a soundbite. She didn't give them one. She gave them a truth. "When I first walked into this building, I was holding a mop," she said. Her voice was firm, clear. No one looked at me. They looked past me. A pause. I was the janitor's kid, not a student, not a thinker, not a voice. She took one step closer to the edge of the podium. But just because they didn't see me doesn't mean I wasn't watching. Gasps. A few people exchanged glances. Thomas stood still, watching with something between admiration and guilt. I'm not here today because I knew all the laws, she continued. I'm here because I saw something wrong, and I said something. She held up the pen. And now, they can't unhear me. They can't unsee me. Back home in East Ridge, her picture was on the front page of the paper. Again. But this time, it wasn't under whistleblower teen or custodian's daughter. It simply said, Zariah Miles signs history. Below it a quote. I used to dream of walking into Belvoir one day as an intern. I never imagined I'd walk out as the reason it changed. Weeks passed. She returned to Columbia. Back to books. Back to lectures. Back to weekend dinners with her mom, who still folded napkins as if expecting bad news at any moment. But there was no more bad news. Zariah wasn't just a student now. She was a symbol. She got letters from all over: girls in Detroit, boys in Alabama, single mothers in Oakland, retired postal workers in Philly, who said they wept watching her on the evening news. One letter came from a girl named Ania, 11 years old. I used to think people like us couldn't change anything she wrote, but now I think maybe we can. Zariah kept that letter taped above her desk. One day she asked Naomi Grant over coffee, "Do you think it'll last, the reforms, the change?" Naomi smiled, stirring her tea. "Change never lasts by accident," she said. "It lasts because people like you show up again, and again, and again." Zariah nodded. She understood now. This wasn't the end. It was only the first page of a much bigger story. On the anniversary of the Belvoir reform, the company held a small ceremony. A plaque was unveiled in the lobby. No gold, no marble, just brushed steel mounted at eye level. It read, "This company was rebuilt not by power, but by truth," dedicated to Zariah Miles, who refused to stay silent. April 23rd, the day integrity took the mic. Zariah stood there that day in a simple black coat, arms folded. She didn't cry. She didn't speak. She just smiled. Not the kind of smile you wear for cameras. The kind that says, I was here. I mattered. I left something behind. The story of Zariah Miles began in silence, in mop buckets, overlooked hallways, and whispers behind closed doors. But it ended with a voice strong enough to change a company and inspire a movement. Her journey reminds us that courage isn't always loud. Sometimes it's a quiet stand, a single truth spoken in a room full of denial. The kind of strength that grows not from titles or applause, but from knowing who you are and daring to act on it. What about you? Have you ever felt unseen, yet still chose to do what's right? If this story touched something in your heart, we'd love to hear from you in the comments. Tell us, when was the moment you refused to stay silent? And if you believe more people should hear stories like Zariah's about truth, dignity, and the quiet power within each of us, please consider subscribing or sharing this video with someone who might need it today. Thank you for walking this journey with us. Your presence here means more than you know.
Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.